Welcome to Far From Perfect. I'm really happy that you are joining me for episode 2. As I've thought back over these last few weeks when we've been in the midst of the coronavirus and COVID-19 and sheltering in place, I realize just how far from perfect I feel. And I've reflected on that a lot to wonder, what is it about this scenario that's just made me feel so bad about myself? And I think a lot of it has to do with external expectations sometimes that others have of us, but also the expectations I put on myself. So, one of the things I reflected on was when I was pregnant with my first child, I had a placental abruption. And when that happened, I had to go into the hospital on bed rest. I was 24 weeks pregnant when that happened, and I remained in the hospital on bed rest until I had Jacob, and he was healthy, and we're so thankful now. But in the midst of all that, we didn't know how things would turn out. We didn't know that everything in the end would be okay. And this was also in a time before we had streaming services like Netflix. We actually just had TVs that had cable, and you might have a VHS tape that you could watch. We didn't have smartphones and all of the capabilities to work remotely. It was a different world and a different time. So it was very isolating to be in the hospital for 12 weeks. But I did learn some lessons in that time that I think have helped me as I've reflected back and thought about how I'm going to continue to approach the situation that I find myself in now. And one of those lessons that I learned was about feelings, and that my feelings are my feelings, and it's okay to feel what I feel. I don't have to psychoanalyze or justify why I feel the way that I feel. So when I was in the hospital on bed rest, oftentimes I might just find myself wanting to cry because I was terrified for my child. I didn't know if he would live or die. I was very sad about things that I was missing out on, that I wouldn't get to decorate the nursery or pick out the crib. There was a lot going on emotionally. But when people would come to visit, if they saw me upset and crying, they'd be like, "Oh, what's wrong? Is something wrong with the baby? Is everything okay?" Because immediately they would think, "Oh, well, she must be crying because something really bad must have happened." And what I wanted to say to everybody is, everything is wrong. Everything about this is not okay. And that's kind of the way I feel right now with the coronavirus. There's sometimes when I go and I might go for a run and all of a sudden I start crying. Or I wake up in the morning and I try to start work and I just have that knot of anxiety in my chest. And I'm like, why am I feeling so anxious? Or why am I bursting into tears running down the road? What's wrong with me? Why am I feeling this way? And I think one of the things we need to understand is we don't have to justify these feelings. We are in a pandemic, in a global crisis. Everything about our lives has been turned upside down and disrupted. You are going to feel what you're going to feel, and it's not always going to make sense. Sometimes you may feel anxious and you have no idea why. Sometimes you may even feel like laughing, which would be a good thing, and you don't know why. But other times you may just feel like crying and you don't know why, and that's okay. You don't have to explain your feelings to yourself or to anyone else. Another thing I learned about was the power of getting outdoors and of nature. So when I was first on bed rest, my bed faced a window that faced a brick wall. So I got to look at that for about 6 weeks, and it was horrible. And then finally, I got a window that looked out at some trees. They moved my room. And it was amazing the difference that it made just to be able to see some nature and to see the outdoors. And that was one lesson I've learned through working at home and doing everything through this coronavirus. When I first started working at home, I was working so many hours that I felt like I don't have the time. I can't get outside. I've got to just work. And that was taking this terrible toll on my emotional and mental health. So eventually I decided I need to get outside and at least walk or run or do something every day that I can. And when I started to do that, it was just the little things that would catch my attention. Like I would see little baby birds, the eggs hatch and then the little birds in a nest. And I might at the same time see a tree that had blown over in a storm and that had died. But even though I was seeing that cycle of life as I walked and got out in the sunshine, there was some comfort in just realizing that the world is so much bigger than I am. Another thing I learned was about just the power of laughter sometimes when the world has gone crazy. So a few weeks into my bed rest, I just got so depressed. It was in the summer and I was in that hospital room and I was about to go crazy. And I finally told one of my doctors, I said, I just don't know how much longer I can take it. And he said, well, why didn't you tell me? So he told my husband, Mike, that he could take my bed while I'm laying in it and roll me outside into the parking lot for about an hour so that I could get outside time. So that night, we got me kind of wrapped up a little bit, in a robe because I'm in my pajamas, I'm on bed rest. And Mike took my bed and pushed me out of the hospital. And people were looking at us like, what is happening? Why is that man pushing his pregnant wife out of the hospital in a bed? So he pushed me out, and then we went into the parking lot and we found a parking space, and he just backed the bed into the parking space in between cars. And we just laughed because we were like, this entire situation is crazy and ridiculous. And what are people thinking that are driving like, oh, can I park there? Oh no, there's just a hospital bed and a pregnant woman laying in the bed in the middle of the parking lot. It looked ludicrous and crazy, but there was so much laughter for us in that moment because just for a little bit, I felt like we were doing something that was just so out of the ordinary, but it also made me feel normal to just be able to laugh and to have fun. And then I think the final lesson that I learned was about meaning. And when this placental abruption happened, there were a lot of conversations that I had with my doctors, that I had with my friends, that I had with my family. Why did this happen? What do we think happened? Had I been in an accident? Did I have some type of rare blood disorder that could have led to it? Was there just something wrong with my placenta? Had I been under too much stress and that caused this to happen? There were just so many questions about what had led this awful event to happen to me. And even after I had Jacob, no one ever was able to figure out why it happened. But one thing I can tell you that I did learn is that it is not the time in the middle of a crisis to try to find the meaning. It wasn't until many years later that I started to look back and to see some of the lessons that I learned from this terrible event that had happened, from this placental abruption. And I want to encourage you with that right now. I think some of us feel pressure to say, there's meaning in this. I'm going to find that meaning right now. I'm going to see what all the lessons that I'm going to learn in the middle of this pandemic. There's enough stress on all of us right now without adding the stress of trying to find the meaning of all of this. I take some comfort in Ecclesiastes 3:1 when the verse talks about how there is a time for everything under heaven. So there is going to be a time for us to find meaning. There will be a time for reflection when we come out of this, and we can look back and hopefully begin to learn some of those lessons and find that meaning. But at least for me, that time is not right now. The time right now is the time to give myself some grace and to be okay in the uncertainty of right now, but knowing that the time will come and the time will be right for me to find that meaning and that purpose. I hope you have a great week, and I hope that you will join me next time as we have our next episode of Far From Perfect.